Yes, people, I'm Srini and you're watching MTAG TV. And of course, I'm joined by a man that if you love the Premier League and if you love the beautiful game like I do, I mean, this man needs no introduction. He has been commentating on the beautiful game for over 3 decades. He's commentated on Champions League finals. He's commentated on the Premier League, as I mentioned. And now he's in the States commentating on the Major League Soccer, of course. This man has lent his voice to the beautiful game for over 30 decades, as I mentioned. And I think he's added a sense of poetry to just 22 men kicking a ball about, to be honest. So let's not waste any more time because you already know who it is. We are in conversation with Mr. Jon Champion. Lovely to have you on the show, Jon.
It's great to be with you. Thank you for the invitation.
Sure, Jon. It's an absolute pleasure. And, before we actually kick things off, I wanted to ask you, how's life living in the States? Because, of course, you've been commentating on the Premier League for years now, but, of course, this must be such a culture shock for you. So how's that like?
Yeah, it's fascinating, particularly in these pandemic times, to be living in what to me is a foreign country. I think people often say that the UK and the US are similar, that we share a language. Well, that's about all we share. The culture is entirely different. So coming to live here for 5 years, which is what I committed to do a couple of years ago, and work for ESPN, has been a challenge for my family as well, because my wife and the youngest of our 4 children has moved with me, and he's at an American high school now. Okay. It's been a really good way of sort of rebooting my mindset, because as you alluded to, I've covered top football for 37 years now, right. Most of it based in the UK and Europe. And I think you do get to a stage where you're covering the same story for the 5th, 6th or 7th time. So to look at the Premier League at the moment, for example, Newcastle, the threat of relegation, a team with so much potential and yet they could go down. It's probably the 5th time in my cycle of working that's been the case. Right. So to come here and start telling different stories and to have to learn a league from scratch, which was the case with me in Major League Soccer, and to come to a territory where soccer is growing so quickly, and with a World Cup on the horizon in 2026, was just a really exciting opportunity. I'm not sure that it's forever. I signed up initially for 5 years, and I'm 2 and a bit years into that. And I very much enjoy going back to the UK periodically and still calling some Premier League games. So I was back at Christmas and New Year, and I did, I think, 8 Premier League games, a couple for the world feed that would have been heard in India, and others for Amazon Prime, who hold some of the rights. So it's nice to have that mixture. But yes, the dominant part of my job is here in the United States. And it's just nice in my mid-50s, as I am now, to be having to think about things again, rather than just doing things almost automatically.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, actually. In fact, I was having a very similar conversation with my friends today that I think this must be the 500th time I've seen the same old Neymar is headed back to Barcelona story. And after a while, it just gets boring, to be honest. And the same thing with Newcastle and Mike Ashley and so on and so forth. So I totally agree with you. But, Jon, we all know and admire you as one of the game's greatest ever commentators. But we as fans don't really know how you actually got into football. What made you fall in love with the beautiful game in the first place? So what are those origins like? What's that story like?
I first went to a professional football game in January 1978. I was 12, and it was York City against Newport County in what was then called the 4th Division of the Football League. This is before there was a Premier League. That was the 1st Division was the equivalent. This was the 4th Division. The crowd was 1,978, and my team York beat Newport County 2-0 with goals from a former Northern Ireland international called Peter Scott, who used to play for Everton, and a chap called Gordon Staniforth, who subsequently went on to play in an FA Cup semi-final for a lower league team, Plymouth. So that's by the by. But I was just captured by the experience of going to a professional football match, of seeing these only 2,000 people swaying on the terraces, totally engrossed in the drama that was being ploughed out in front of them. I remember the smell of the liniment that the players would rub into their limbs emanating from the dressing rooms as I walked behind the main stand on the way in. I remember the click of the turnstile as I paid my money to go in. And I remember the taste of the Bovril, which is a fairly horrible beef drink, but it's traditional at football grounds in England. I remember the taste of that at halftime. And suddenly this whole new world had opened up to me. I'd been able to watch football on the television as much as you could in those days, but had never been allowed by my parents to go until this particular day. And I was really just captured by that. And my parents had pushed me towards music as a child. They'd given me piano lessons and violin lessons, and I was able to play both of those instruments to a really good standard. But they would insist that on a Saturday I would go and spend 4 hours at orchestra practice. And all I wanted to do was go and watch the football. And what added to it was their house was only about a quarter of a mile from Bootham Crescent, which is the stadium that York City had. So on a Saturday afternoon, when I was walking back from the orchestra practice that I hadn't wanted to go to in the first place, I could hear the crowd in the background roaring and cheering when a goal went in. And for years, I thought that's where I want to be, not playing my violin. And eventually I got the opportunity. So to cut a very long and intricate story short, that was how I was first captivated, I suppose, by what you rightly describe as the beautiful game.
I mean, firstly, I'm super surprised by how good your memory is. You remember the exact drink you drank and everything. And I want to mention the fact that, now you're an established commentator. You're one of the greats of the game to me. Absolutely. And I'm sure you go to parties and you meet friends and you meet old acquaintances, and they must say to you, Jon, you have the dream job. You travel the world, you get to meet footballers, you watch football. I mean, it can't get better. So, and while partly that may be true, for people who do think that commentary and this kind of a job is just all fun and games, what is it actually like to be a football commentator? Because most of us don't know, to be honest.
It's great. It's everything you would imagine that it is. I mean, I don't think, if you think that we rub shoulders with the players all the time, well, that's not really the case. But I mean, it's part of my job to know the managers, to be able to call them up quietly and have a chat to them and find out what's going on. And inevitably, you do get to know various players. So, for example, I've dealt a lot with David Beckham over the years, and now that I'm based in America and he's running a Major League Soccer team in Miami, it's been great to bump into him a couple of times. And we start our Major League Soccer season a week on Sunday, our first broadcast, because it runs April to December here, and that's at Miami. So I may well have to deal with David again. So it's quite nice to have those relationships. But I think the real beauty of it is that you're working in an unscripted environment. So every day, every game, every broadcast is different. It's not like hosting a quiz show on TV where you know the format and you know basically what the outcome's going to be. With football, everything's gloriously uncertain. So it's more of a challenge, but it's also more of a delight because you never know what's going to happen next, and you've got to be prepared for whatever eventuality may fall into your path. So for that reason, it's great. I think the element of slog that every job has is the preparation. And I think perhaps there isn't always a full understanding of how much preparation you need to do to perform your duties properly. So for a Premier League game, you should be spending probably 3 days preparing, studying videos, doing notes, maybe making a few phone calls and finding out what's happening and how the teams are likely to line up tactically. That is the unseen part of the job. And the fact that you've got to travel a lot, which is great for most of the time, but travel can wear even the most enthusiastic broadcaster down. So I was at the stage, one of the reasons I came to America was that my working life had changed from doing maybe 35, 40 games a year 20 years ago on British TV to now, or more recently, when I left, doing I think 200 games in the year before I departed for America, which is, you think that's great, 200 football matches, and it is, but if you think 3 days preparation for each, 200 games, there's 600 days work, and at the last count, there are only 365 in a year. Then you've got the travel that goes with that. I was driving 60,000 miles a year in the UK. I was flying every week to do Champions League and Europa League. I was coming to America 6 times a year to do games for ESPN. Then every other year there's a major tournament, the World Cup or the Euros, that you go to for 6 weeks. So I was just never seeing my family. So it was getting to the stage where it was taking over to a degree that I couldn't really afford long term. But yes, coming back to your original question, it's a fabulous job to have because it doesn't feel like a job.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I think the reason why I asked that question is because, of course, it's a fantastic job. Let's be honest. It's the dream job, but at the same time, there is a lot of graft that goes into it. And I'm sure you must take around 90 to 100 flights every year. I mean, that's just simple maths to me. I think it must be 90 to 100 flights, and that's got to be exhausting. I mean, come on. So, I mean, Dennis Bergkamp would say it's exhausting, let's be honest. But anyway, moving on from that, of course, football, as you mentioned, is such an unpredictable sport. You have those Aguero-like moments. You have those Liverpool versus Barcelona-like moments. You can't really prepare for those moments in a sense. So when those movie-like moments do happen, can you actually enjoy those moments as a fan? Or is it a moment where you have to come up with a sort of a piece of poetic genius? Because if you think about it, while it is a very fun moment and you are a football fan, you can't go absolutely mental like we do, even if Michael Owen does what he does against Argentina. So what is that balance like? How do you actually do it?
Peter Drury or whoever it might be, when something happens in a football match, the reason that you're watching is not particularly to listen to us, it's to watch that football match. So one of the things I was told about becoming a TV commentator is that by all means, find a line that reflects a moment and captures a moment, but never try to dominate a moment. Because if you're covering an event that's covered by 25 cameras around a pitch and all sorts of replay facilities and sophisticated sound, then your words are never going, in the long run, to outweigh the moment that those cameras capture when a great goal is scored. So the thing that will remain forever is the goal. So, I mean, look at Aguero's goal that won the league. All the commentators that did it that day were basically the same. They shouted, Aguero!
Exactly.
And kept going, almost South American style. There's
Yeah.
nothing particularly poetic about that, but it captured the moment. So I think that's important as well. As a commentator, you can't always be striving to produce the line that people might remember 5 years hence.
Exactly.
Because you're never going to be able to achieve that. And also, you're getting into territory where you're perhaps having to be a little bit contrived. And this is commentating should be an entirely spontaneous act. So it's what comes into your head at that moment in time to reflect what's happened. And I think particularly for myself, my philosophy has always been that less is more, and that many TV commentators, for my taste, talk too much and get in the way a little bit. Whereas I think it's far better to talk a little bit less, so people pay more attention to the words that you do produce rather than mentally switching off to this wall of noise that's coming at you. So I think less is more is also one of the sort of mantras that I've always tried to operate by. So, for example, the Aguero goal, that's perfect, isn't it? Just shout Aguero. And then you let the match director do the rest, cutting from camera to camera, Aguero jumping into the crowd, the place going mad. The job's done for you, and it gives you 10, 12, 15 seconds whilst you let that play out to actually think, how am I going to sum this up with the next time I open my mouth?
Right.
So, yeah, you don't need to be so reactive that as soon as something happens, you're in there, rat-a-tat-tat-tat-tat, sentence after sentence, paragraph after paragraph. Let the cameras do their job too.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I mean, I'm a massive Manchester City fan, so Martin Tyler's commentary to me is, that's on another level. But as you said, it's not Ernest Hemingway. It's just streaming Aguero like any South American commentator streams goal, 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 and that's pretty much it. But it's still just absolutely brilliant. But you speaking of Peter Drury, I think he said one thing that really stuck out to me, and that's that every commentator is as good as the moment he's given. And if you take that into consideration, what are the greatest moments that you have witnessed as a commentator?
Oh, goodness. So many, it's difficult to pin them down, really. I think World Cups tend to throw out particularly great moments. So I go back to that 1998 game, England and Argentina in St Etienne, as perhaps my favourite game, just because so much happened in it. So you've got David Beckham effectively launching his career by getting sent off. Right. And yes, he was a great player, but I think to become the global icon that he has, you need a little bit of notoriety in the mix, and getting a red card in England's most important game in years provided that notoriety and helped him on his way to global stardom. You've got the wonder goal by Michael Owen at the age of 18. You've got the battle of 11 men against 10. You've got Sol Campbell's goal being disallowed towards the end. You've then got extra time and you've got penalties. So much happened, and there were such huge audiences for that I think I put that up there at the very top. But aside from that, I mean, I really enjoy covering the moments that people still talk about. But in some ways, I get more satisfaction from being at a third round FA Cup tie and seeing a non-league team beat a team from the Premier League or the Championship. Right. Because that's so unexpected. And you really are watching history unfold on those occasions. And many of my happiest memories are being at tiny grounds on scaffolding gantries that have been built specially to accommodate a couple of commentators and a couple of cameras at grounds that aren't used to TV coverage, and seeing famous players as the visiting team beaten. So I think of teams like Stevenage beating Newcastle, Sutton United beating Leeds United. And there are maybe 20, 25 examples of that during my career. And I think if I was asked for my really favourite occasions, more often than not, it would be games like that. And I mean, you're right. I've been fortunate to add my voice to to moments that people always talk about throughout the history of the Premier League as well. And I recall great goals in the 90s by Matthew Le Tissier. I remember the 2-4-3 games between Liverpool and Newcastle when it looked like Newcastle were going to win the league under Kevin Keegan, and Stan Collymore scored a 93rd minute goal at Anfield to deny them. And Keegan, there's a famous picture of him draped over the advertising hoarding in front of himself because he knew that the game was gone and the title challenge was falling apart. Wonderful moments like that. I remember Andre Arshavin scoring 4 goals for Arsenal in a 4-4 draw at Liverpool. And at the same time, other broadcasts that stick with me, things like doing an FA Cup quarter-final between Tottenham and Bolton at White Hart Lane on the day that Fabrice Muamba collapsed with a cardiac arrest on the pitch, and we were live to the nation broadcasting that. That probably presented more challenges to me as a broadcaster than anything else I've had to do. So when you say, what are your favourite moments? What are the greatest moments? It's not just, this is the goal that won the World Cup, this is the goal that won the Champions League. It's for me, it's a more nuanced selection than that.
Right. I totally agree with you. I really like the fact that you mentioned the stories, because I remember there was a game between MK Dons and United, and I think MK Dons won that 4-0. And I think it's those stories that really stick out to you, which is why the Leicester story was just so unbelievable. So yeah, I totally agree with you there. But it doesn't have to be a Thierry Henry, it doesn't have to be a Wayne Rooney, but were there certain players who you looked at in their primes and when you're going up to the gantry, you're thinking, wow, I can't wait to commentate on this game because I can't wait to watch this player because he really is in his prime? Were there certain players that stick out to you? Again, as I mentioned, they don't have to be global superstars. They can be anyone.
No, well, some of them are global superstars, inevitably. So whenever you watch a Messi or a Ronaldo, you've got that frisson of excitement about what they're going to produce on that particular day. I think Neymar occasionally comes into that category, not as frequently as perhaps he once promised to do. And I think Kylian Mbappe has got the possibility of doing that. And obviously Erling Haaland as well has an approach to the game that is so uncomplicated and yet exciting, and what might he achieve over the next 10 to 15 years. But I think particularly since the advent of the Premier League, there have been certain players who have had the capacity to lift you out of your seat. So I'm thinking of people like Thierry Henry, Dennis Bergkamp. I mean, that goal he scored not in the Premier League, but in the World Cup quarter-final for the Dutch against Argentina and Marseille in 1998 is just a heavenly moment of sporting genius. The way that he pulled out Frank de Boer's long ball from deep inside his own half. I think he later described it as a stretched limo of a pass, which I thought was a beautiful description. The ball forward 50 yards by Frank de Boer to Bergkamp, and then the instant in which he took it down with the silkiest of touches and then poked it past Rower in goal, was sport becoming beauty. And occasionally it just crosses that line and you just think, wow, how on earth have they managed to do that? And in a way, they're the easiest moments to commentate on because of that. So Bergkamp in the Premier League as well. I think we've all seen his pirouette goal against Leicester City as part of a memorable hat-trick for Arsenal. I think David Ginola, when he was flying down the wing, first for Newcastle and then for Tottenham, was a thrilling presence. One of my own favourites is Matthew Le Tissier, and many viewers will look at this and think, well, who was Matthew Le Tissier? Well, he was a god in Southampton. When they played at the old Dell, their former ground, which was the smallest stadium in the Premier League and the First Division before it, 15,000 people shoehorned in like sardines in a tin. And he was a player who could easily have won 100 caps for England, but maybe didn't always have the mental application because the game came so easily to him. And if you look at a compilation of the greatest Premier League, you'll see that he dominates. And you would turn up on a Saturday or a Sunday, it seemed, week after week, and he would score an utterly breathtaking goal, which would always win goal of the month and sometimes goal of the season. So he would be another one that I would add to my list. And then other players have just been wonderfully effective. So Alan Shearer was never going to lift you out of your seat with something of aesthetic beauty, but he scored 260 goals in the Premier League. And the famous celebration with the arm upraised as he ran away after his latest triumph. So things like that have stuck with me as well. I mean, someone sent me a clip the other day of a game that I'd commentated on 25 years ago to the day, and it was at Manchester City at Main Road at the old ground against Southampton, and it was a Georgian called Georgie King-Fancy running from deep inside his own half, and I was a young commentator on Match of the Day. I like to think that if I commentated on that now, I'd make a much green around the gills early in my career, and maybe didn't make of it all that I could have done. But that remains one of the great Premier League goals. And then you've got things like Robin van Persie, some of the volleys that he scored, Giroud's scorpion kick. So many things. I mean, this is a scattergun approach in answering your question, but it's a means of saying that we've been blessed, particularly in the Premier League, with so many of these players touched by genius, really, and happily a number of them remain, and they're just fantastic to watch.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm really happy that you mentioned the likes of Matt Letizia and King Cloudsy as well, because some people may be watching this thinking, who even are these guys? But these guys are some really special footballers, exemplary footballers, especially Letizia. I mean, what a player. I mean, as you mentioned, every goal of this is a goal of the season, Puskás level goal. So yeah, absolutely brilliant player. But
I think the best way of putting it is that we all live in our own generation. And I'm old enough to have lived through several generations now. But if you're thinking, who's Matthew Letizia, someone in 20 years will be thinking, who's Kevin De Bruyne?
Exactly.
So it's cyclical, it goes like this, but it's worth a delve into YouTube and into the history books.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, as Premier League fans, or as football fans in general, I think fans should try to do their due diligence, because these players are what made the Premier League the product it is today. But, you know, you've commentated in almost every part of the world. And I think you've commentated in certain stadiums where, on special nights, especially, like, for example, European nights at Anfield, or, you know, the Signal Iduna Park when they play the likes of Schalke or Bayern Munich, those stadiums seem special on those nights. So can you sort of recall certain stadiums where you thought, wow, I'm really in the middle of something special here?
Yeah, I mean, it's usually a combination of the stadium and what their home team is doing at the time, because that dictates the atmosphere. Exactly. But there are certain cathedrals of the game where you always get the full experience. Barcelona would be one. To a slightly lesser degree, I would say Real Madrid. I think that the Allianz Arena in Munich is such an upgrade on the old Olympic Stadium where Bayern used to play, because the noise, it was such a wide, shallow bowl that the noise would just dissipate. Whereas now the noise is kept within. So that's a great place. Dortmund with the yellow wall, fabulous. I think in England, Newcastle is always a favourite, because when Newcastle are at it, when they're playing well, and you've got 52,000 fully paid up members of the Toon Army watching, that's a special place. Anfield, you mentioned. Goodison Park, I love. We're going to have to enjoy it a lot in the next 2 or 3 years, because they're moving to a new stadium down at Bramley Moor Dock, which is great for them and its progress, and they need to do it. But Goodison Park is just the archetypal English football ground, with the crowd close to the pitch. Much of the architecture from a Scot called Archibald Leach, when it was built back at the late 19th century, still there. The crisscrosses on the front of the stands. Next time you see a game from Goodison, you might watch the game that's on this week from Goodison Park and just take note of that. So you're surrounded by history, and the atmosphere is terrific. I think you look at some of the newer stadiums, the atmosphere hasn't always been replicated because they're so much bigger. But one of my favourites, in answer to your original question, is the old Mestalla in Valencia. To go and watch latter stages of the Champions League, when they were reaching finals, when Hector Cúper, the Argentine, was the manager. They had some great players. And you'd go there to watch a Champions League quarter-final, semi-final. And the beauty of that was that all the stands were the old wooden stands. And so the spectators there would stamp their feet rhythmically to create the atmosphere. And it became like a threatening drumbeat. So that's one that certainly lives with me. I think Old Trafford has always been slightly corporate. It gets the biggest crowd, 75,000, but it's not always the noisiest. I think also they're so spoilt by success there that a lot of the punters turn up and sort of say, well, come on, entertain me before I start shouting and making a noise. It doesn't always work like that. And then a lot of the smaller grounds are great. Wolves, I say smaller, it holds 30,000, but that's a noisy old place with a great history to it as well. The place where the first floodlit matches against touring European teams were played in the 1950s, before European club competition was a thing. So I mourn some of the old grounds that have gone.
Fans, like new generation fans like myself, will never really know what those stadiums were like back in the day. So I totally agree with you. But of course, we've talked about you commentating on TV, of course, but you also commentated on the famous Pro Evolution soccer games for years now. And there's two questions that I have. Last question that I have, and it is a bit of a loaded one. And, we've had this brief chat, and I have sort of got a little insider into the kind of answers you give. So I don't think you'll say something like, I want to be remembered as a legend. But if you could look back at your legacy, what would you like to be remembered as?
Well, I hope I'm not in legacy territory for a good 10, 20 years. I'm 20 years younger than Martin Tyler, so I'm hoping I've got a good few years left at
I think
doing this. Where that will be, whether it's America or the UK, time will tell. And as usual, it'll be where the TV contracts go covering the games and where you hope someone wants you to go and work. In terms of a legacy, that's a very grand term. I don't really look at it in legacy terms. I just look at it in terms of my own selfish good fortune of being able to do a job like this that's given me so much pleasure, that's allowed me to travel around the world at other people's expense by and large, to make so many friends, and above all, to give me a calling card so that wherever I travel, I get off an aeroplane and maybe I go in a bar or I go in a restaurant, there'll be someone that will want to talk about football. And I've just been in the fortunate position of being at the microphone for so long, for so many games that, and I think you'd find that Martin Tyler, Peter Drury would say the same, that we've got this glorious existence whereby wherever we go, someone is interested in what we do and wants to talk to us about that and to talk about this great game as well. So I don't really look at it, I'm not dodging the question, I don't look at it in terms of a legacy. I mean, possibly if I was looking for a legacy, would I have come to America? I don't know, but it was a challenge and it was an interesting new chapter. So I decided to do it. So I think perhaps in a roundabout way, it answers your question. I'm not about legacy. I'm about doing this for as long as I reasonably can, enjoying it as much as I can. And I hope never getting in the way too much, coming up with the odd half decent line that people might remember a few years down the line. And they say that you're quickly forgotten, and I will be, just as all my colleagues will be. But it would be nice if in 20, 30 years' time, people are thinking, it's a pity he retired, because we quite enjoyed listening to him.
Well, Jon, I can assure you this. If you come to India, firstly, we will recognize you. And secondly, we'll probably make you sign at least 500 copies of Fez. So there's that. But, with that, of course, we should wrap up the interview. Jon, it's been an absolute pleasure. As someone who loves the game as much as I do, as someone who, lives and breathes the game, and all of my friends and sort of everyone I know, this is a dream come true. So I have to mention that. And of course, guys, thank you for watching. It's been a fantastic experience. And, like, subscribe, press the notification bell, do all of that good stuff. Of course, in the link below, in the description below, rather, you will find the link to the MTAG website, of course. So check that out. What else do I plug? Of course, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, guys, follow all of that stuff. And of course, thank you for watching. And for the next time, we move.